The prison gates loomed tall and cold under the early morning sky. Inside, the walls were gray and worn, and the air smelled faintly of disinfectant and sweat. The atmosphere was tense. Everyone knew the rules were strict, and the consequences for breaking them were serious. But tension was not just from the rules, it was in the eyes of the men behind the bars. Some were quiet, but their silence carried danger. Others shouted, moved quickly, and eyed the officers suspiciously. It was a world built on power, fear, and survival, and everyone had a role to play. Among the officers, there was one who stood out, not because of her words, but because of the calmness she carried. She walked with steady steps, uniform pressed, boots clicking lightly on the concrete. Her posture was straight, shoulders relaxed, yet ready for anything. Most people underestimated her at first glance. She was black, fit, and disciplined, but not overly muscular, not the sort of person who made people flinch with their presence alone. That mistake, she knew, often worked in her favor. People assumed she would be just another officer, someone who followed rules but could be pushed around. They didn't know she had lived a life of rigorous training, of discipline, of fighting when it was needed and surviving when others failed. She had started her day early, before the sun had fully risen. There was no rush, no panic. She checked her equipment carefully, her belt, her radio, the small tools she might need, and most importantly, her mind. She believed that readiness began in the mind. Every shift could be unpredictable. Every second could demand quick thinking. And the prison, with its controlled chaos, was always unpredictable. As she stepped into the main hall, the familiar sights greeted her, the long corridors lined with bars, officers moving in pairs, and prisoners starting to stir from their cells. A few prisoners glared at her. One or two whispered to each other, stealing glances, testing reactions. She did not flinch. She kept her pace calm, observing every movement, every gesture, every slight change in body language. She had learned over the years that small details could reveal a lot. Some prisoners were loud, bragging, trying to show dominance even behind bars. Others were quiet, observing, waiting. Some were clever, trying to manipulate situations to their advantage. She had faced all kinds of people in her career. Yet each new day brought surprises. Each day could be the day something unexpected happened. But she felt ready. She trusted her instincts, her training, and the awareness that had been honed over years. The officers around her acknowledged her with nods and small greetings. They knew her reputation. She wasn't someone who sought attention, but her efficiency and calm confidence had earned respect. She wasn't arrogant, but people noticed her presence. There was a balance in the way she interacted. Firm, fair, but not easily provoked. The prisoners, however, did not fully understand her. Some whispered among themselves, assuming she could be challenged or intimidated. "She's just another officer," one inmate muttered, loud enough for a few nearby to hear. "We'll see how tough she really is." They did not know her past, did not know the strength she carried. They did not know she had been trained to respond in ways that would leave no room for mistake, no space for chaos. Her first task of the day was routine, checking the perimeter, ensuring prisoners were accounted for, and observing the general behavior in the halls. To anyone else, it might seem simple, even mundane, but she understood that routine could hide danger. Small incidents often escalated quickly. A careless step, a missed warning, or a moment of distraction could cost someone dearly. She stayed focused. Every glance, every sound, every movement mattered. As she walked down the corridor, she noticed one prisoner staring at her longer than necessary. He was big, heavily tattooed, and moved with a sense of self-assuredness. Most people would have felt uneasy, intimidated even. She felt nothing but awareness. She watched the way he shifted his weight, the subtle tightening of his fists, the way his eyes flicked around, calculating. He was planning something, or at least thinking he was. She made a mental note to keep a close watch. Other prisoners began to sense the tension. Some whispered quietly to one another. Some tried to act normal, but she could see through it. The careful observation was part of her instinct. It had been built over years of experience, of reading people, of noticing small things that most would overlook. She passed a small group of officers near the control room. They greeted her, and she returned the nod. One young officer looked nervous. He had been on the job only a few months and had already heard rumors about her skills. He didn't fully understand them yet, but he knew she was different. She smiled faintly at him. not to reassure but to show that calmness and composure were key. Panic was never helpful. As the day went on, the prison slowly came to life. The guards moved in patterns, prisoners followed routines, meals were prepared and cells were checked. Yet beneath the surface, tension brewed. Inmates who had been quietly observing her continued to whisper among themselves. They underestimated her. They assumed that her calm, composed demeanor was weakness, that her discipline meant she could be pressured or manipulated. They had no idea that behind her steady gaze she carried a readiness that could change the outcome of any situation in seconds. She stopped briefly by the mess hall, observing a few prisoners who were arguing. She didn't intervene yet. She didn't need to. Her presence alone often made people reconsider escalating, but she stayed aware. Every sound, every shift in body language, every glance told a story. She understood the unspoken rules of behavior in this environment, and she respected them while also maintaining her authority. By mid-morning, she had completed the first round of checks. She moved toward the recreation area, where prisoners were allowed limited time outside their cells. Here the dynamics were different. People tested boundaries more openly. A small group of prisoners eyed her as she walked past. Some tried to make jokes, some made small gestures to provoke a reaction. She didn't react. She only observed. Every action, no matter how small, was part of the larger picture. One prisoner, taller than the rest, made a move as if to step closer, to block her path. His face carried a mix of arrogance and mischief. He wanted a reaction, some sign of fear or uncertainty. She didn't give it. Instead, she slowed her pace slightly, maintaining eye contact calm and firm. The subtle shift in her demeanor was enough to unsettle him, though he did not fully realize it yet. Other officers nearby noticed the tension but didn't interfere. They trusted her judgment. They knew that she would handle it. She was not reckless. She was precise, calculated, and ready. The quiet confidence she carried was not something that came from ego. It came from experience and preparation. As she finished her first full round of the day, she made one last stop at the control room. She checked the logs, observed surveillance cameras, and made mental notes of unusual behavior. She noticed patterns, movements, and subtle signals that others might overlook. She understood that control in this environment came from awareness, not just force. The morning slowly gave way to midday. Prisoners settled into their routines, but tension lingered beneath the surface. She sensed that some of the bigger, more aggressive inmates were planning something, testing boundaries, trying to find a weakness. She welcomed the challenge. For her, preparation and calm assessment were weapons as effective as any physical skill. She did not fear confrontation. She only respected it, knowing that it required full attention and discipline. By now, the first hints of a brewing conflict were clear. A small group of prisoners had started moving together, whispering, glancing toward her more frequently. They were underestimating her. They thought her calmness meant weakness. They had no idea that she had faced danger before, that she was trained to react with precision, that she could turn the tide of any confrontation in moments. She walked down the hall one last time before taking a short break. The officers on duty nodded to her, acknowledging her presence. The prisoners looked, some with curiosity, some with challenge. She kept walking, observing, noting, understanding. The day had just begun, and she knew that the real test was yet to come. Her mind remained clear, her focus sharp, and her body ready. The tension in the prison was palpable, and she could feel the energy shifting. Something was about to happen, something that would test not only her skills but also her calm, her discipline, and her ability to respond to the unexpected. But she was ready, always ready. And as she paused for a moment, glancing down a long corridor lined with bars and shadowed corners, she knew that soon the calm would end and action would begin. The prisoners had no idea who they were about to face, and that gave her the advantage. The morning continued to pass, but the tension in the prison seemed to grow with every step she took. The officer moved with her usual calm and confidence, yet she could feel the subtle shift in energy. Something had changed. The prisoners, who had been quietly observing earlier, were now acting with more purpose. Their whispers grew louder, more deliberate. Groups of them exchanged glances and small nods as if silently agreeing on a plan. They were underestimating her just as she had sensed. She moved through the corridors with her usual awareness, noting every detail. A shadow that lingered too long near a door, a hand that twitched near the edge of a table, a glance that lingered on her a second too long. Every subtle movement told a story. She didn't act yet. Her calm exterior concealed the calculations running through her mind. She needed to understand exactly what she was dealing with before responding. The prison was noisy now, a mix of the usual chaos and something more restless. The clanging of metal doors, the shouts of officers, the occasional outburst from prisoners, it all blended into a background rhythm she had learned to interpret. She could sense patterns that others missed, rhythms that hinted at brewing trouble. Her instincts, honed over years of experience, told her that a confrontation was imminent. She passed by the common area where several inmates were gathered. Some of them tried to appear casual, lounging on benches, playing cards, or talking quietly, but their eyes kept flicking toward her. She noticed the way a few of them leaned slightly forward when she walked past. As if preparing to spring into action, she didn't flinch. She continued her walk, maintaining the calm demeanor that made it clear she was aware of everything. One officer nearby tried to smile at her, a gesture meant to lighten the tension. She returned the nod, but her mind was already working, analyzing the potential risks. She thought about the prisoners who had a history of aggression, who had resisted authority before, who might see her as a challenge. She had dealt with men like this countless times. Some underestimated her, thinking she was just another officer. They didn't know what she was capable of. As she moved toward the hall leading to the exercise yard, she noticed a few prisoners lingering near the door. One, larger and more confident than the others, stepped slightly forward. His posture suggested he was testing boundaries, gauging her reaction. She slowed her pace just slightly, keeping her eyes on him without showing any fear or hesitation. Her calm, steady gaze seemed to unnervingly meet his, and yet he didn't back down. Other prisoners began to notice the interaction. A ripple of murmurs passed through the group, and a few tried to subtly position themselves nearby, ready to act. They were preparing to challenge her, thinking they could catch her off guard. But she had learned long ago that awareness was as powerful as physical strength. She studied them, noting each movement, each subtle change in expression. She understood their intentions before they even acted. The officer's reputation had begun to precede her. Some of the newer prisoners had heard whispers from others about the calm, composed officer who never panicked, who seemed to anticipate moves before they happened. Still, many didn't fully understand. They assumed it was luck or exaggeration. They were about to learn the truth. As she walked into the exercise yard, the sunlight cast sharp shadows across the concrete. The prisoners were allowed limited freedom here, and tensions often flared in this space. She kept moving, noting the dynamics. A few groups were playing cards or tossing a ball, but most were standing in small clusters, their attention divided between their activities and the officer. Every movement, every glance, every subtle gesture was part of her observation. She reached the far end of the yard and paused for a moment, scanning the area. She could see that some of the prisoners were positioning themselves strategically, testing distances, trying to figure out how to act without being immediately restrained. She remained calm, giving no hint that she saw through their plans. She had learned that revealing awareness too early could escalate situations prematurely. Patience, she knew, was often more powerful than force. A slight noise behind her caught her attention. She turned slightly, eyes narrowing, and spotted a small group of prisoners edging closer, hands subtly flexing, readying for a confrontation. It was the moment she had been anticipating, though she didn't need to rush. She could feel the energy in the air, a silent challenge that demanded immediate attention. The officer adjusted her stance slightly, subtle and controlled. She was ready, her body tensed just enough to respond with speed and precision, but not enough to reveal the full extent of her capability. Her training and experience gave her an advantage most of the prisoners didn't anticipate. They saw a calm figure, not a predator ready to strike. That miscalculation would cost them. One of the prisoners took a step forward, a challenge in his movement. Others followed. Their confidence was growing, fueled by the assumption that they could overpower her simply because she was different, because they underestimated her. She observed, calculating, waiting for the exact moment to respond. Every second mattered. A misstep could escalate the situation dangerously, but every calculated move could end it quickly. A brief moment passed. The air seemed to tighten with expectation. The prisoners were ready to test their assumption, to assert dominance in their own misguided way. She remained still, yet fully aware of every micro-movement. Her presence alone was already beginning to influence their behavior, though they didn't realize it. The first real action came when one prisoner lunged slightly, attempting to grab her attention to provoke a reaction. She shifted effortlessly, avoiding the grab without a hint of panic. The sudden move caused a ripple through the group, and some began to hesitate, unsure of how to proceed. They had expected fear, resistance, or confusion. They got none of it. Her response was subtle but powerful. A combination of controlled movements, strategic positioning, and calm authority made it clear that she was not someone to challenge lightly. She didn't shout. She didn't make threats. She simply existed as a figure of awareness and readiness. That presence alone began to destabilize their confidence. Other officers, seeing the subtle tension, moved closer, but still gave her space. They trusted her judgment. They knew she could handle the situation without unnecessary force. She had earned that trust through years of calm decisiveness and measured action. She didn't need to assert herself loudly. Her competence spoke volumes. The prisoners paused, their plan unraveling even before any true conflict began. Their assumption that she was just another officer was fading, replaced by a growing awareness of miscalculation. She remained calm, observing, waiting. Patience had always been a tool of hers, and it was working now. As the tension stretched, the officer noticed the hierarchy within the prisoners. Some were leaders, others followers. Understanding these dynamics was crucial. She had faced groups like this before, and she knew that neutralizing the leaders often prevented further escalation. Her mind worked quickly, analyzing potential moves, predicting responses, and preparing for immediate action if necessary. The prisoners' whispers grew uncertain. Their confidence was slipping. They had intended to challenge authority, but their plan was faltering under her composed observation. They had misjudged her patience, her awareness, and her skill. They did not yet see the full measure of what she could do, but they were beginning to sense it. She moved slightly, subtle and controlled, positioning herself where she could react to any sudden aggression. Her movements were precise, almost invisible to untrained eyes, yet deliberate. She was ready for whatever would come next. The tension reached a quiet climax. The prisoners, now uncertain, exchanged hurried glances. Their initial aggression had stalled. They were unsure, second-guessing their plan, while she remained calm, fully aware of every option. Her presence alone was enough to maintain control for now, but she knew it was only a matter of time before someone acted, and she was ready. The tension in the prison yard finally snapped. The small group of prisoners, emboldened by their own overconfidence, decided to test their assumptions. They moved together, forming a loose formation, trying to corner her near the benches and exercise area. Their whispers ceased, replaced by determined, hostile glares. They had misjudged her calm demeanor, assuming it was weakness. They were about to learn their mistake the hard way. She sensed it immediately. Her instincts, sharpened over years of experience, picked up on the shift in energy. The subtle movements, the slight change in posture, the way their eyes flicked to one another. Everything screamed, attack. She didn't panic. She didn't shout. She simply adjusted her stance, light on her feet, ready to respond with speed and precision. The first prisoner made a move, lunging toward her with a sudden push. He thought he could catch her off guard. She sidestepped effortlessly, using his momentum against him, and guided him slightly off balance. It was a controlled movement, calculated to neutralize his immediate aggression without unnecessary force. But it was only the beginning. Another prisoner jumped in from the side, swinging his fists in a crude attempt to intimidate her. She ducked under his swing, moved behind him, and used a quick pivot to shift his weight, sending him stumbling forward. The others hesitated for a split second, shocked by the precision of her actions. Their assumption that she could be overpowered in numbers was crumbling fast. Her movements were a blur to anyone not trained to see them. She didn't rely on brute force alone. Every step, every pivot, every block was deliberate, designed to neutralize the threat efficiently. She kept her balance, her awareness, and her composure. She wasn't angry or reckless. She was focused, calm, and ruthlessly effective. The prisoners quickly realized they had underestimated her. Their initial confidence was replaced with confusion and fear. They had planned to overwhelm her, but she was too fast, too precise, and too aware of their intentions. Even as more attempted to close in, she maintained control. redirecting their movements and preventing them from gaining any advantage. One particularly large inmate charged at her with full force, trying to push her back against the wall. She caught his wrist mid-swing, twisted it with perfect leverage, and used his momentum to guide him down to the ground safely but firmly. The sound of him hitting the concrete echoed through the yard. Others froze for a moment, realizing this was no ordinary officer. The surrounding prisoners tried to regroup, but she anticipated their moves. She shifted positions slightly, subtly herding them into tighter spaces where they could not attack freely. She didn't shout. She didn't panic. Her authority was inherent in her movements, her awareness, and the confidence she radiated. Each step, each action reinforced that they were facing someone who could not be taken lightly. Officers nearby moved cautiously, ready to intervene if necessary, but they knew her reputation. They had seen her handle tense situations before with precision and restraint. They trusted her judgment. She didn't need them yet. She could handle the situation on her own. A few prisoners tried to grab improvised objects, a broom, a chair, anything to tip the odds in their favor. She remained calm, maneuvering around each one, redirecting their efforts and disarming them without unnecessary violence. Her movements were precise, efficient, and fluid. She understood the importance of control, not chaos. Every action was calculated to maintain safety while asserting authority. The prisoners began to panic. Their plan to intimidate her had completely failed. Fear replaced their bravado. They started making mistakes, leaving openings that she immediately exploited. She was not cruel or aggressive for the sake of it. She was disciplined, using her skill to neutralize threats while minimizing harm. Her focus was unbroken. She could see the hierarchy within the group, the leaders, the instigators, the followers. She knew that neutralizing the leaders would quickly disorganize the rest. She targeted them first, using controlled maneuvers to subdue the most aggressive inmates. Each step was deliberate, each movement efficient, leaving no room for counterattack. The yard, once a chaotic space filled with tension, was now a controlled environment under her watchful eye. The prisoners who had intended to challenge her were either on the ground, stepping back in fear, or frozen with uncertainty. They realized they had misjudged her completely. This was no ordinary officer. They were facing someone trained, disciplined, and utterly capable. Her breathing remained steady. Her movements were deliberate, never wasted, never rushed. She had learned long ago that panic only leads to mistakes. Calmness, awareness, and precision were far more effective than anger or brute force. She had faced dangerous situations before, and she knew the value of maintaining composure under pressure. The rest of the prisoners began to scatter, trying to regroup and find safety in numbers. But she anticipated their moves, cutting off escape paths subtly, ensuring no one could act without her knowing. Her control over the environment was complete. Yet it had taken nothing more than skill, awareness, and discipline. One officer finally stepped forward. Just as a prisoner attempted one last desperate grab, she blocked the attempt effortlessly, guiding him away from her without causing serious harm. The other officers quickly moved in to restrain the subdued prisoners. It was over in moments, but the impact was undeniable. The prisoners had learned a harsh lesson. Appearances could be deceiving, and underestimating someone could have serious consequences. She took a deep breath, standing tall amidst the subdued prisoners. Her movements had been precise, her focus unbroken, and her authority unquestioned. The calm that returned to the yard was a reflection of her skill and discipline. No one challenged her again that day. The prisoners who had tested her now knew the cost of their misjudgment. The officers nearby nodded in quiet respect. They had seen her in action before, but each demonstration of her skill reinforced their trust and admiration. She didn't seek recognition, but it came naturally. Her presence and capability spoke louder than words ever could. As she walked back through the corridors, the prisoners' whispers changed. Fear replaced arrogance. Respect replaced challenge. They had learned something important. Strength was not always visible, and discipline could be far more powerful than reckless aggression. The officer returned to her post, calm and collected, yet fully aware that her job was never finished. Every day brought new challenges, and she would face them with the same focus, awareness, and skill. The prisoners now knew better, but she knew the situation was never completely predictable. Her readiness, discipline, and ruthlessness when necessary would always be her greatest tools. The yard, once tense with aggression, now returned to a semblance of order. The prisoners kept their distance, the officers regained control, and the calm authority of the black officer was firmly established. She didn't smile, didn't boast, and didn't need to. Her actions had spoken louder than any words could, and as she walked back to the main hall, her mind already assessed what had happened, what could have gone differently, and what to watch for next. She remained vigilant, composed, and ready. The fight had been won, but her duty continued. There was always another challenge waiting, another day to maintain order, and another opportunity to demonstrate the strength that came from discipline, awareness, and experience. The prisoners, still recovering from the shock of the confrontation, whispered among themselves. They had underestimated her, and that mistake would not be repeated. From this day forward, her presence would command attention and respect, not just from her colleagues, but from those who had once thought to challenge her. The officer paused for a moment, looking down the long corridor, the echo of footsteps fading behind her. Calmness radiated from her, a quiet assurance that she was prepared for whatever came next. She didn't fear conflict. She respected it, understood it, and met it with precision. Her skill, discipline, and unwavering focus had turned a potential disaster into a controlled outcome. And with that, she continued her patrol, vigilant, composed, and ready for the next test that the prison would throw her way. The prison yard had returned to an uneasy calm, but the tension lingered in the air. The prisoners who had attempted to challenge her earlier now kept their distance, glancing nervously at the black officer as she moved through the corridors. She had restored order, but her job was far from over. In this environment, control was never permanent. Respect had to be maintained, boundaries reinforced, and vigilance constant. As she walked, she observed the prisoners carefully. Some were quiet, retreating to their corners or cells, speaking in hushed tones to one another. Others were pacing slowly, clearly shaken by the confrontation. They had underestimated her, and now they understood the consequences. It was not just her skill that intimidated them. It was her calm, composed authority, her ability to assess, predict, and respond to any situation. That combination made her formidable, and it was a lesson that would stick with them. She stopped briefly at the control room to check on security feeds and review prisoner movements. Every detail mattered. Even after the fight, she knew there could be aftershocks, residual tensions, whispered plans, or retaliatory aggression. She made notes, mentally mapping out potential problem areas, prioritizing attention, and ensuring that her presence alone could maintain the sense of order she had established. Officers moved around her with quiet efficiency. They respected her not because she demanded it, but because her actions demonstrated competence and discipline. Younger officers especially looked on with admiration and a touch of awe. They had witnessed a display of skill and calm authority that few could match. Some tried to smile or make light conversation, but she only gave subtle nods. Her focus remained on the prisoners and the ongoing operation of the facility. There was no room for distraction. The prisoners who had tested her earlier were now a mix of emotions: fear, respect, and a begrudging recognition of her ability. They spoke quietly among themselves, sharing impressions of what had just happened. The leader of the group, who had initiated the attack, avoided eye contact and remained unusually quiet. His followers mirrored his behavior, their earlier arrogance replaced with cautious compliance. She didn't act out of anger or revenge. Her role was not to humiliate, but to maintain order and safety. That distinction made her different from the prisoners she managed. She understood discipline and respect, and she enforced it with both firmness and fairness. Her actions in the fight were not about showing off. They were about control, precision, and the safety of everyone in the yard. As the day progressed, the routines of the prison slowly resumed. Meals were served, work assignments continued, and prisoners moved in a more controlled, subdued manner. Her presence alone ensured that the aggressive energy of the morning had dissipated. Officers carried out their duties efficiently, and prisoners learned quickly that defiance would be met not with panic or chaos, but with skilled, deliberate action. She walked past the rec room, where a few prisoners were attempting to re-establish normal activity. Their movements were cautious, hesitant, almost respectful. She observed them closely, ready to step in if necessary. Her eyes, calm and unyielding, communicated authority without a single word. The lesson of the morning was clear. Misjudging her was a costly mistake, and they would not repeat it lightly. In the hallways, Some prisoners whispered, casting glances at her as she passed. Their tone had shifted from challenge to curiosity and wariness. They wanted to understand her, to gauge her limits, but they knew instinctively that testing them directly would be unwise. The confidence that had fueled their attack was gone, replaced by a newfound respect for her discipline and skill. She paused briefly to watch a young inmate struggling to manage his frustration. Instead of reacting harshly, she approached with controlled authority. Her presence was enough to calm him, her steady gaze communicating that she understood the struggle, but that aggression or chaos would not be tolerated. She helped him redirect his energy constructively, guiding him without force. This moment showed that her power was not only in physical skill, but also in the ability to influence and manage people effectively. The officers around her continued their work, aware that her leadership extended beyond combat. She set the tone for behavior in the prison, not through intimidation alone, but through consistent, calm, and deliberate enforcement of rules. They watched as the prisoners gradually adapted to her authority, learning boundaries and respecting her presence. In one corner of the yard, the leader of the earlier attack attempted to speak to his group. His voice was low, careful, and controlled. He explained that they had misjudged the officer, that their assumptions had been wrong. The others listened quietly, nodding in agreement. The lesson had been harsh but necessary. They understood now that strength was not always visible, and discipline could be far more effective than aggression. The officer observed this quietly, noting their behavior without intervening. Her role was not to micromanage every interaction, but to maintain overall control. The prisoners were learning from the consequences of their actions, and she allowed that process to unfold naturally. Her discipline, patience, and strategic awareness were tools that ensured the prison remained orderly, even after chaos had erupted. She continued her rounds, checking cells, corridors, and common areas. Every movement was deliberate, every glance purposeful. She maintained awareness of potential threats, subtle signs of tension, and shifts in group dynamics. Her skill was not only in combat but in observation, understanding, and anticipation. The earlier fight had reinforced her presence, but her continuous vigilance ensured that respect and order persisted. Throughout the day, officers approached her with updates, questions, or minor incidents. She responded calmly, efficiently, and without unnecessary showiness. Her authority was reinforced through competence, not ego. The younger officers learned by watching her, understanding that true leadership combined skill, calm, and the ability to maintain control under pressure. Meanwhile, the prisoners who had tested her earlier kept a careful distance. They moved cautiously, their whispers now tinged with caution. Even the most aggressive of them had learned that direct confrontation with her was a mistake they could not afford. Her presence alone was enough to regulate behavior, prevent chaos, and maintain authority without constant intervention. As the day drew toward evening, she paused for a moment in a quiet corridor. The sunlight streamed through small windows, casting long shadows on the floor. She reflected briefly on the morning's events. The attack had been handled efficiently, the prisoners had learned a valuable lesson, and the yard was under control. But she knew that every day brought new challenges. Vigilance was never optional. She resumed her patrol, moving through the prison with calm determination. Prisoners gave her space, officers moved efficiently around her, and the overall atmosphere, while still tense, had shifted toward controlled order. Her presence was a reminder that discipline, awareness, and skill were far more powerful than reckless aggression. In private moments, she considered her own approach. She did not act out of pride or ego, nor did she seek recognition. Her goal was clear: maintain safety, enforce rules, and ensure that every prisoner understood the consequences of their actions. Her calm authority, combined with her readiness for any threat, created a balance of respect and order that few could challenge. Even as the day ended, and the prisoners returned to their cells for the night, the impact of the confrontation lingered. Whispered conversations circulated about her skills, her calmness, and the way she had handled the situation. Rumors spread quickly among inmates. They understood now that she was not to be underestimated, and that lesson would remain long after the events of the day. Officers prepared to leave for the day, exchanging nods and quiet remarks about the day's events. She remained vigilant until her shift ended, ensuring that the prison's order remained intact. Her work was never done, but her presence had left a lasting mark on both prisoners and colleagues alike. As she walked toward the exit, her movements calm and composed, she knew the respect she had earned was more than temporary. The prisoners who had challenged her had learned the value of caution, discipline, and awareness. They had seen firsthand that skill and composure could overcome arrogance and aggression. She stepped out of the main corridor, looking back briefly at the prison she had maintained order in. Her mind was alert, her focus sharp, and her readiness unwavering. The events of the day had reinforced her role as a leader and protector within these walls. The prisoners had learned their lesson, the officers had seen her strength, and the balance of authority had been reestablished. And as she walked out of the yard, she knew that while today's confrontation had ended, her vigilance would never waver. Order had been restored, respect had been earned, and her presence remained a powerful force within the prison. Even after the chaos of the day, the prison remained tense in subtle ways. The morning's events had sent a clear message. The black officer was not someone to be underestimated. Her calm authority, skill, and presence had reshaped how the prisoners viewed her. But she understood that respect was not a one-time thing. It had to be maintained through consistency, awareness, and fairness. She moved through the corridors with her usual steady pace. Each step was deliberate, each glance purposeful. The prisoners she had faced earlier now kept their distance, but she watched them carefully. Their whispers and exchanged glances were evidence that they were still processing the lesson they had learned. Some tried to act casual, but subtle tension betrayed their unease. She observed silently, understanding that her influence extended beyond the immediate fight. It shaped behavior for days, weeks, and even months to come. The officers around her continued their duties, aware of the impact she had on both staff and inmates. Some had worked alongside her for years. Others were newer and still learning. All had come to recognize that her approach combined discipline, skill, and authority in a way that maintained order efficiently without unnecessary conflict. They trusted her judgment, knowing she could handle the unpredictable nature of prison life while keeping both prisoners and staff safe. She paused briefly by the control room, reviewing reports and observing activity on the monitors. Her attention to detail was meticulous. Every movement of the prisoners, every subtle shift in their behavior, was noted mentally. Even after a major confrontation, she knew that complacency could be dangerous. Staying alert and aware was as critical as any physical skill she possessed. Some prisoners approached cautiously, not to challenge her directly, but to test boundaries in smaller, less aggressive ways. She addressed them calmly, firmly, and fairly. Her interactions were measured. She did not overreact, but she did not ignore any behavior that could escalate. Her presence alone reminded them that authority could be exercised without unnecessary force. Yet with clarity and precision, the larger group of prisoners, including those who had attempted to attack her, remained subdued. They had learned a difficult lesson. Misjudging someone who combined skill, awareness, and calm authority could be costly. Quietly, they began to understand that her leadership was not just about strength, it was about discipline, observation, and a readiness to act decisively when needed. Throughout the day, she continued her rounds, checking cells, observing interactions, and maintaining control of the prison environment. Even in routine tasks, she maintained vigilance. Every detail mattered. Her calm, deliberate approach ensured that tension did not flare up again. It also demonstrated to the prisoners that while they might test boundaries, consistent authority and awareness would always prevail. In moments of quiet, she reflected on the events. She did not seek recognition or praise. Her satisfaction came from knowing that the prison was safe, that order was maintained, and that both officers and prisoners had a clear understanding of what her presence represented. She had turned a potentially dangerous confrontation into a lesson in respect, discipline, and awareness. The younger officers in particular observed her closely. They saw how she managed both conflict and calm, how she maintained authority without resorting to aggression unless necessary, and how her presence alone could regulate behavior. They were learning not just how to act in difficult situations, but also how to lead with composure and intelligence. As evening approached, the prisoners began to settle. Meals were served, cells were locked, and the general flow of the facility returned to routine. Yet even in this routine, her presence remained influential. Those who had challenged her earlier were quieter, more cautious, and more respectful. The lesson had been internalized. They understood now that calm awareness and skill were more powerful than reckless aggression. She took a moment to observe the yard from a distance. The sunlight cast long shadows across the concrete, and the sounds of movement and chatter were subdued. The atmosphere had shifted from chaos to cautious order. Her eyes scanned the scene, noting minor details: who moved where, how prisoners interacted, subtle changes in posture. Even after the fight, her vigilance never wavered. Control was not about dominance alone. It was about awareness, observation, and the ability to respond appropriately at any moment. The prisoners had begun to adapt. Some whispered among themselves about the officer's skill and composure. Rumors spread quietly, carrying stories of how quickly she had neutralized multiple attackers with calm precision. Her reputation was no longer just among officers. It was known to the inmates as well. Misjudgment would no longer be tolerated. She continued her rounds, checking doors, observing corridors, and interacting with both officers and prisoners as needed. Her calm demeanor, combined with her readiness to act decisively, created an environment where order was maintained without constant confrontation. The prisoners who had attempted to challenge her earlier understood that their previous assumptions were false, and that lesson would guide their behavior moving forward. At one point, she encountered a group of younger prisoners struggling with frustration and conflict. She approached them calmly, guiding them to de-escalate the situation. Her authority was felt not through intimidation, but through presence, skill, and the understanding that discipline and awareness were tools for maintaining safety and respect. By nightfall, the prison had returned to a steady rhythm. The officers completed their shifts, and the prisoners settled into their cells. The lessons of the day had been learned, quietly but effectively. Respect, discipline, and awareness had triumphed over arrogance and aggression. As she walked toward the exit of the yard to conclude her shift, she felt a quiet sense of accomplishment. Not from pride, but from the knowledge that she had maintained order, ensured safety, and reinforced the boundaries that kept both staff and prisoners protected. Her calm authority had shaped the day, and its effects would last far beyond the immediate events. She paused briefly at the main corridor, looking back over the prison she had helped control. The echoes of footsteps, whispers, and movements were fading into the evening. She understood that her job was ongoing. Vigilance, awareness, and readiness were required every day. Yet the day's events had reinforced her position as a skilled, disciplined, and authoritative figure within the prison. Even as she left the facility, the respect she had earned remained palpable. The prisoners had learned a valuable lesson. The officers had witnessed competence and calm authority, and the balance of order had been restored. Her presence had made the difference. Her mind reflected briefly on the lessons of the day. She had faced aggression without fear, maintained composure under pressure, and acted decisively when needed. The confrontation had been handled efficiently, safely, and effectively. The prisoner's perception of her had changed forever, and her own understanding of control and authority had been reinforced. As she walked into the quiet evening outside the prison walls, she remained vigilant, aware that tomorrow would bring new challenges. But she also knew that her presence, skill, and calm authority would continue to influence the environment inside the prison. Respect had been earned, boundaries had been reinforced, and the lessons of the day would carry forward. She took a deep breath, steady and calm, reflecting on the power of awareness, discipline, and readiness. Strength was not always about aggression. It was about understanding, preparation, and controlled action. Today had been a reminder of that truth. And as she disappeared into the evening, the prison remained under her quiet, unwavering watch. The lessons of the day, the importance of respect, discipline, and awareness would endure. Her presence would continue to influence behavior, maintain order, and ensure safety long after she had left the yard. She had faced aggression, responded with skill and calm, and reinforced her authority. The prisoners would not forget the lesson. The officers would continue to respect her approach, and the balance of control within the prison had been restored, not through fear alone, but through the quiet power of skill, discipline, and unwavering awareness. The day had ended, but her vigilance would continue. She remained ready for any challenge, aware that her presence alone was a force that shaped the environment, maintained order, and commanded respect. The lesson was clear: underestimate her, and the consequences would be swift and decisive. She walked away, calm, composed, and prepared for whatever tomorrow might bring, knowing that her skill, discipline, and authority would always make a difference.